was very difficult for me to find meaningful relationships because once they found out that I had children, then they were like, well, how is that? You're a stud. I'm like, but I'm still female. It's like people just got hit in the head with a rock. They didn't understand how someone masculine identifying as I am could have children. Like, do I need to get the book out, and show you pictures?
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. Our episode today is a continuation of our conversation with lesbian couples. Today we speak with Annise and Benae, also known as Benae. They talked about the dynamics of their family lives, work, partnership, and the sustaining elements that keep them together. We had so much fun, and our interview was over 2 hours long. We had to break this conversation into two pieces, an A and B selection. So today is part one. Be sure to check out part two in our next episode.
My name is Benae Ingram, and I'm not a very serious person, but I do have a serious side. I enjoy what I do for work, or it's my career. I enjoy teaching. I think my ability to be less serious allows my students to grow with what they're learning from me. And I take great pride in that. I take great pride in what I do. But I don't want that to be what people see. I want people to see a happy, smiley, just no nonsense type of person. And I think that's what's most important. So I show up as just me.
What do you teach?
Radiology, clinical instructor at Emory Decatur Hospital. And I've been a clinical instructor some 25 years now. So I started out at Midwestern University in Texas as a clinical instructor. And then through my years of career, I've moved from Texas to Boston, now here to Georgia, because I fell in love with Dr. Mabry. That's my baby. But my core is simply touching a person in a way that brings out the best of them.
How did you get started in radiology?
My father died when I was 13. He had a stroke. And I saw images of what was his brain. And I was intrigued by that because of the blood and stuff. But they weren't very good images. But I can remember those images. And that was my first exposure to what we now know as radiology or CAT scan. And at the same time, my mom was put in the hospital. So we didn't know my father was going to die, but we knew my mother was going into the hospital because she had had strokes before, and they were going to do a procedure called a carotid arteriogram of the vessels of the neck and the head. So the night my father died, my mother was in the hospital having that procedure. So we went from one hospital to the next. My father passes away. We go to I see the CT of the brain. We go to the next hospital, and they show me these images of her neck, the carotid arteries and the circle of Willis and the cerebral arteries. And I was intrigued by that, but I was young. I was 13. I didn't know what they were. I knew they meant something. She survived that. By the time I'm 18, she got diagnosed with cancer. And I can remember I drove her to the hospital. She was going to have a CAT scan of the abdomen. And I didn't know. I know now. I know the terminology now. I didn't know then. But I'm sitting in the waiting room, and the CT tech comes out, and he says, you have to drink this stuff. And this stuff was horrible. I mean, it was chalky. It was nasty. And my mom was very, very sick. So she sat and she sipped it, and he would come back and he was badgering her. You got to drink it. You got to drink it. I can't do your CAT scan if you don't drink it. So she kept trying. And I remember sitting next to her, and I hold her head, and I was like, please, Mama, please just drink it. They got to see what's going on. And she got it down and then promptly threw it all up. And the CT tech came out, and he was like, you've wasted an hour of our time. We can't do this study. I'm just going to scan you just like it is. And we can't see. And my mom was like, I'm sorry. She couldn't hold it down. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to do what you do. And I'm going to treat people differently. I don't know what this is, but I'm going to treat people differently. So I went home. I was supposed to go to Langston University to play basketball. But again, my mother's diagnosed with cancer. And I said, Ma, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to join the Army because I've got to get a way to pay for college. They pay for college. And she said, okay. So I went to the recruiter, and lo and behold, they had a radiology specialist program. And I did that, and I went away for 2 years for training. And, of course, during the time that I was away for training, my mom did pass from the cancer. And, she gave me the blessing to go. She was a Jehovah's Witness, and Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in joining the military. But had she not given me the blessing, I wouldn't be the person that I am as a tech now. So, as an instructor, I've never told Annise that story. But as an instructor, that comes from, I teach these students this because I don't ever want them to walk out and belittle a patient that's trying their best and they're dying. You don't even know. A lot of the patients I see, maybe they live on the street, they're homeless, whatever. You don't know. You don't know how sick they are until we take that image, and then we know. And a lot of times, as a tech, we've moved on to the next, and that patient is left to deal with whatever illness that they have. So to me, it's important that I teach the students differently. Because obviously the guy that was treating my mother was taught one way. And I've seen that person throughout my 30 years of career as a technologist. I've seen that style of treatment. So it's very important to me, especially with the students. And this program that I'm working with now, it's very important that they go out into the field and carry that legacy on that I'm installing. I'm trying to install this kindness, this caring, this understanding for the patient. And that your job is important to these people, because without you, a lot of patients walk around and don't know that they're ill, don't know that they have a cancer, don't know that they have something going wrong with their kidneys or their liver, until you take that picture. And it's a very important job that you do. And it's very important that you treat that patient a certain way, because tomorrow is never promised, But the last thing they're going to remember is that CT tech or that X-ray tech treated me badly, and now I'm dying. I don't want that.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us and being very vulnerable. Yeah. Oftentimes when we think about certain careers, and I'm just thinking about radiology, we forget some of those really professional, I won't say a skill, but we forget what it means to be empathetic with the work that you do.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference. Having someone who's professional and someone who realizes that the person in front of them is in fact a person, a human with emotions and family and relations. And so they need to be treated in a certain way. So that's very profound, and it really says a lot about you as someone who does that work and someone who's instructing other people to do it just as well.
Yeah, there was a lot there.
Yeah, there was a lot there.
Sorry.
No, that was beautiful.
But that's how I became this. And it also speaks to why I try to be super light and try to be super open and fun. Because life doesn't have to be so serious, because it's going to end for all of us. It's going to end.
And who are you?
My name is Dr. Annise Mabry. And I show up in this world as an activist, an educator, a homeschool mom, a cancer survivor, a wife, a CIDP survivor, and I show up as a powerful, positive force of energy. What impacted me the most about who I am is the women in my world that poured into me when I was coming of age. And Marianne Adams played a huge role in my early formative years as a young African-American lesbian. Marianne was there for everything from my first breakup to my first girlfriend to my first apartment to my first marriage, which she told me don't get married. to my first job at the police department that I promptly got fired from because Marianne told me don't be answering the phone from my girlfriend on the recorded lines. So Marianne has, she's been there for me. And I will always remember it was about 7 or 8 older African-American lesbians. And they all surrounded me and they poured into me to make sure that I had everything that I needed for the journey that I was going on. And I didn't even know where I was going at the time.
We should probably stop and say that the Marianne Adams you're referring to is our executive director, Rosamie Noblanc.
When I look at who I became, because I came into Atlanta as a young, questioning woman. I wasn't really sure if I was a lesbian. I just knew that I'd always had in the back of my head that being with guys never felt right. Mm-hmm. And when I came into Atlanta and I really found out who I was, my family did what every other Southern Baptist family does. I came out and I got kicked out. So, I really was on my own and I was struggling and I was searching for family. And that's what we used to do in the Atlanta community, in the Atlanta gay community, is we used to become the family for those that were searching and struggling and that had just come out. Mm-hmm. And I think all of the way that the entire gay and lesbian community poured into me in those early years had a profound impact on me in how I show up, in how I advocate for others. It also had a profound impact on me in the work that I do myself. When I first met Marianne, she was working at Emory University, and I remember just being absolutely in awe about that because I had never seen anyone who looked like me working at a university. Even though I was a university student, I didn't have Black professors. I didn't see anybody who looked like me in academia, but seeing Marianne in academia, it made me say, I'm going to be the dean of a university one day. And I always said that. I didn't quite know what I was going to be the dean of, mm-hmm. but I just knew if Marianne can be in a university, then that means that I can too. Mm-hmm. And that's important. Being able to see people who look like you in professions that may not always be available to you in your community, that is so important. I think that's one reason why I have always been drawn to kids who have been thrown away, so to speak, mm-hmm. or they have been academically excluded, meaning that, the public school doesn't necessarily say, oh, you can't come to school here. But what they do say is, well, maybe this school isn't a good fit for you. Maybe you would be more comfortable somewhere else. That's excluding someone. Mm-hmm. And so those kids are my passion.
Tell us more about the work you do in education.
So my daughter she was 12 years old when we first moved to Rockdale County. And we were in one of the fastest declining school districts in Georgia. So my daughter experienced the worst case of bullying that was ever recorded in Rockdale County. She was stabbed with pencils. She was hit in the back of the head with a literature book. She was tripped in class. Her food was spat on at lunch. I mean...
Why did they bully her?
There was no reason. The girls to this day, they could never tell you why they did this to her. She was an easy target. She didn't fit into their groups. She was a very free spirit, an independent thinker. She was a leader, not a follower. And what I learned then about bullying in this era is, when I was in school, we had one person who was like a bully. But the other girls would always, the girls would team up together. In this era of social media bullying, if one person turns on you, everybody in that little clique turns against you. And even if everybody else in the clique doesn't have a problem with you, they still follow the clique and they turn against you. So when that happened with my daughter, and I went to the school several times, and I followed the chain of command. I did everything that I was taught as an educator to do. I kept getting doors closed in my face. And I'm only going to give you an opportunity to close the door on me one time before I start trying to figure out how to build a new door. So when my daughter, the third time that I got the call that my daughter had been involved in a fight at school, because at this point my daughter's tired of being, pushed around. And so she started to fight back, and I'm thinking, this isn't my child. This isn't going to end well. And she ended up beating one of the young girls so bad that she knocked her permanent molar out. And I got the call from the school, and they said that they had her in police custody and that they were going to charge her with felony aggravated assault. And remember, now I'm a police officer, so I know what it means when you say that you're about to charge somebody with a felony. And I get to the school, and the principal and the SRO, they're all standing there. And, it's like a scene out of the movie. And so I walk in, and at this moment, I'm not mom. I'm not Dr. Mabry. At this moment, I've gone into my law enforcement training mode. And, so the officer in me is out. And I walk in, I'm like, okay, I said, tell me about what happened. So the principal and the SRO, the school resource officer, start trying to talk. I was like, I wasn't talking to you. I'll get your version of the story in a minute. I'm talking to my child right now. Tell me what happened. And she says, Mommy, the teacher left the room, and she put, one of her students came to visit, and she put her in charge of the class. And the teacher was gone, and the girls started taunting me again, and I told them to stop. And then they went and wrote some stuff on me on the board, and I went up and erased it. And then one of the girls came up, and she pushed me, and she's like, Mommy, it just went from there. And she said, I'm sorry. I said, okay. So I said, go back for a second. I said, where was the teacher? And she said, she left the room. I said, who was in charge of the class? She said, one of her students that came to visit her. I turned to the SRO and the principal. I said, I think you're going to need a paddy wagon. I said, because if you arrest my child, I said, I want the teacher arrested. I want the principal arrested. I want the assistant principal arrested. I said, then I'm going to post and I'm coming for your certification. I said, do we want to talk about something different other than felony aggravated assault charges? And in that moment, I realized two things in that moment. One, I realized my power.
Yes.
And two, I realized my privilege. And most people, especially parents in a crisis, are not going to have the wherewithal to stand there and think through of, I'm going to beat you at your own game. And the long story short of that was I ended up asking for hospital homebound services for my daughter from the county. And they first told me that my daughter didn't qualify for hospital homebound services because those were for medically fragile children only. And I said, you all have allowed my daughter to be bullied so much that she has been hospitalized inpatient twice. She has now developed cutting, and she is struggling with severe depression. And I said, I can't think of a child more medically fragile. You had an obligation to protect her. I sent her to school to be educated, not to be broken. You broke her. And, they just were not budging. And so at that moment, I like to call this person Dr. Mommy Mabry. Dr. Mommy Mabry appeared, and she said, the way that I see this is I pay taxes in this county. You work for me. These are not your services. These are my services. And if I want to use my services to provide hospital homebound services for my daughter, then that's how I'm going to use my services. And we got the hospital homebound services for the last 3 or 4 months of the year. And then the next year I said, I'm not going to fight this battle anymore. And my daughter turned to me and she said, what about homeschooling? And I said, oh, I can't homeschool you. I don't know how to homeschool. And she said, Mommy, you have a PhD in K-12 education. She said, you can homeschool me. And I was like, oh, and I was just so reluctant because everything that I'd ever heard about homeschooling was negative.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told her, I was like, okay, I said, well, we're going to try this for 1 year. I said, but I'm going to keep searching for a private school for you.
What grade was she going into?
She was going into the 8th grade at this point. So going into her 8th grade year, we decided that we're going to homeschool and so it was going great. And then we ended up being featured in the Georgia Juvenile Justice Project because I fought so hard to change the laws for bullying because most of the counties in Georgia had bullying laws on record, but that hadn't been updated since the 1980s.
Wow.
So, as I'm fighting to change the laws, the Georgia Juvenile Justice Project runs our story, and the Oprah Winfrey Network reads our story. And so we end up doing a show on Oprah. And from that, she gets a scholarship to a private school. And I'm like, oh, this is the answer to our prayers. I did not want to do homeschooling anyway. We get to the private school, and the private school bullying was worse than the public school.
Wow.
So I homeschooled her, and I got her graduated from high school. And, when we did dual enrollment, I mean, it wasn't easy. It was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And then in the midst of all of that, I ended up meeting, I actually knew Benae from the Girls Guide because she used to be one of the forum moderators. And
what's that?
A Girls Guide it started out as a blog for women to share all of their experiences and, just everyday life stuff.
Lesbians or just?
Lesbians.
It was lesbians, yeah.
Mostly. There was one or two women that kind of supported lesbians, but were in straight relationships.
Okay, some allies
that wrote. Some allies that wrote one or two, but the majority of us were lesbians. Yeah,
because that was my next question. How did you all hook up? I mean, you both have shared such fascinating and provocative stories. I just feel like, woo, let me take a breather here.
I know. Let's do something light.
It's just so. I mean, it's powerful. It's really powerful. Just what both of you bring to what we're talking about today. So, how did you meet?
So, you want me to tell a story, or you want to tell it?
You have a different version than I do, so you go ahead.
Okay. So, my version of the story is Benae was a moderator on a Girls Guide, and I was in another relationship, and I used to share some of the things that were going on in this relationship, and Benae was kind of like the sounding board, and she would always say, well, people are only going to treat you the way that you allow yourself to be treated, and she would also say to me, you keep making her a priority, but she keeps making you an option. But she was never inappropriate with me or anything, and then I come to realize later that she actually thought that the person that I was in a relationship with was my best friend in the entire universe. Yeah. And it wasn't her, it was actually someone else. So what really happened, what really drew Benae to me was the person that I was in the relationship with. We were probably about 3 weeks away from getting married. We had everything booked in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Caterers had been paid, florists had been paid, venue was paid. And so this person decides that it just wasn't going to work for us. But she didn't tell me this. She changed her profile picture to her and another girl, and changed her Facebook status to single. And my daughter came downstairs and she's like, Mommy, why didn't you tell me that y'all weren't engaged anymore? I'm like, what do you mean we're not engaged anymore?
Wow.
Yeah, that sucks.
And, it's hard when your daughter is the one telling you that your relationship is over. And, I was absolutely devastated because this was someone that I had been very public with. Things about us, it was everywhere, and that's probably one of the hardest things when you have a public relationship like that is the public breakup. And I wanted to delete all of my social media. I just wanted to crawl and hide because I didn't want to answer the questions. And So when I shared all of this with the Girls Guide and Benae sent me a message, and she said, can I call you? She said, because this is too much to try to type. And I was like, sure. So she called me, and she's like, look, she said, I know that you're hurting right now. She said, if you need to take a break from social media, she said, take a break. She said, but don't run and hide. And she said, but I will encourage you to tell your story before she does. She said, because she controlled how the relationship ended. She said, but you get to control the spin of the story.
Oh, Benae is coming with all the wisdom.
I'm older than her.
So now, what's your version of the story?
Yes, what's your version?
All right. So,
and what's the age difference?
It's 10 years.
10 years.
Anyway, I was a moderator for a lesbian retreat. If you remember Facebook, we used to have all these groups that we all went into back in 4, 5, 6, 8 years ago. And I was a moderator there, and I was called Old Spice. And Michelle would come in, and we would have these discussions about life, about finances, about everything, sex, whatever, in these private groups. And she asked me to moderate her group, a Girls Guide, which she wanted us to talk about things that directly affect women with children and being a lesbian. And part of it was also to write a blog. So we would write the blog, and then the next day we would moderate the group based on our blog. So I wrote, my blog was Studs with Kids, because at the time, it was very difficult for me to find meaningful relationships, because once they found out that I had children, then they were like, well, how is that? You're a stud. I'm like, but I'm still female. So you ended up in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you ended up, it's like people just got hit in the head with a rock. They didn't understand how someone masculine identifying as I am could have children. Like, do I need to get the book out, and show you pictures? It happens. So, but I would run into a lot of women that weren't interested in dating me because I had children, even though my children were darn near grown. So I started writing a blog from that angle. And then I would come in the group, and Annise was a guest speaker in the group. This was way early. So I went and read Annise's blog. The scene that she painted, where she's waiting in the emergency room, and as the emergency room doors close, they're taking her daughter back because she's having a mental break from all of the trauma that she'd gone through. And Annise felt helpless. And she was writing how she met Michelle, and she incidentally picked the phone up to call another Michelle, but she ended up calling our mutual friend, Michelle. And it just hit me that this woman is totally amazing, because I work in the medical field, and I could see her sitting there as they wheel the child back to be treated, and the child is having a mental break. So this is not let's just wheel you back and we're going to start an IV. This is more of a, we're holding you down, and and then screaming and fighting kind of thing. So I felt her. So I went to her Facebook page. Now, mind you, she is dating someone else, getting ready to get married, and I saw all of that, and I was looking at the images of her, and there was one image of her where she's walking up the stairs, apparently had just run a 5K, and her son is slightly up above her, and he's reaching back to help her walk up the stairs. And I realized that she has mobility issues, but I just didn't know what it was. But I also realized that she had a very beautiful buttocks. That's what got my attention.
We keep it honest on the Zemi Nubla podcast.
I have to be honest. I have to live by set my own set of standards. So I did not say anything to her or try to persuade her away from her relationship. And when we would have the discussions in the room, which is where most of the conversations we would have would start and then move to inbox, I have to be honest with her. I wouldn't tell her to leave her relationship or break up because I really liked her butt. I did. But I could see that she was hurting. And there was always maybe some hope to salvage your relationship, maybe some communication gone wrong, that maybe you guys can talk to each other and figure or work it out. Stop wasting the time and get back to loving. But don't sell yourself short. If someone doesn't want to be with you, then don't waste the pain and don't waste the happiness. You should move on. And then she invited me to be on her radio show to talk about my blogs. But she had these other studs there. Now, I'm not a jealous person. But I was really jealous. I was like sitting back there on my phone just fuming, trying to one-up the other stuff. And we were all trying to one-up each other because we obviously all liked Annise. You know, I told her I felt like, okay, I'm going to interview for this job. So I did. I interviewed for the job. And I got the job. Annise was not an easy catch. Man, goodness. Did I tell you she ran 5Ks? She ran 5Ks around me. One day she loved me. Well, it wasn't really like, I love you. It was more like, I'm really into you. Then the next day was like, you know what? I'm going to Arizona. I'm going to visit a friend. I'll call you when I get back. Who's that friend? We're not in a relationship. We're just talking. Oh, okay.
If I'm correct, you also were in a long-distance relationship at this time, or you're talking?
No, this is early when we first started talking. After she broke up, then you need time to heal. So we did have a lot of conversations back and forth. It was August 23rd, 2013 when we officially became a couple, and that's when the long distance started and the 90-day rule.
And what's your 90-day rule?
It was actually my 90-day rule. So the 90-day rule, because we were in a long-distance relationship, and a lot of times when you are in a long-distance relationship, you focus so much on the intimacy of, when you first see each other, because everything is built up to that point. And so my 90-day rule was we would go 90 days, and there would be no talk of intimacy, no talk of
sex.
No talk of sex.
No sex. No phone sex. No. Just, how was your day today? Really, honestly, tell me, how was your day today?
And, and tell me what's on your mind. Tell me.
What are you thinking about right now?
Yeah, tell me what you want to eat. Tell me what's your favorite restaurant where you are. Truly tell me, don't just tell me about your day. Tell me about the people that you work with. Tell me about the challenges at your job. What do you like most about your job? What do you like? It was all of those deep diving questions that a lot of times when you're in a long distance relationship, you're so focused on the act of intimacy and
getting to the act of intimacy.
Or, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see you. And, and you're sending your representative. So I didn't want to meet her representative.
Oh, she got to learn that I had 2 large dogs, 2 large cats, and a very noisy house.
Yes.
But normally, if you're courting somebody, they won't hear the background noise. My sons coming through, bouncing the ball, are shooting each other with those pellet guns. It was horrible. Are shooting me as I'm talking to her on the phone with one of those pellet guns. So she actually got to know the true me. But not that I would hide it.
Right.
I think I would want to show her the better side of me, but the barking dogs and the screeching, howling cats. She actually, and then she gets to decide whether she can tolerate that. Is that something that she could live with, if she came and visit me,
And, that's why the first time that I came up to visit her, it was actually the Christmas of her Christmas. Now, remember, we've been talking since August. So now it's Christmas, and I'm just now going to go see her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
that's longer than a 90-day rule. I'm still upset at her about that.
It seemed to have provided a very good foundation for the two of you.
It provided a wonderful foundation, Angela. So I get up there, and I get to meet her children, and I get to, I really get to see a day in her life, so to speak.
Now, where were you each living?
I lived in Massachusetts.
And I was in Georgia.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So literally from one end of the East Coast to the opposite end of the East Coast.
And very different weather.
Yes, very different weather, even very different mindsets up there too.
Yeah, we just drive.
And so you went in the wintertime up north.
In the snow.
Wow.
In the snow.
As she was landing, the radio was saying the blizzard, the nor'easter's moving in. Yeah. She had to really trust me because we were out in that many times driving sideways down the highway. But the snow was so heavy that I would have to stop and get out. And you have your windshield wipers going, that it would cake on the windshield wipers. And it was not, they couldn't move. So you'd have to pull over, get out. And I had a long stick and reach around the front of the car and I'd push all that snow off the windshield wipers.
Did you not realize what you were getting into?
I had no. So when she said, it's going to be snowing when you get here, I'm thinking, oh, okay, it's going to be like, like you see on the Hallmark movies, like it's going to be snowing. I didn't realize I was going to a nor'easter. And, so when I get up there, of course, because I have a muscle disease too, and of course I am not at my maximum physical health. So I'm having to have wheelchair assistance to get from the gate to the pickup area because, walking it was just too taxing for my legs. So the first time I see her, I'm in a wheelchair. My suitcase is bigger than I am.
Yeah.
It's snowing. And I just remember her walking over to me and she had on this huge leather jacket. And she looked like one of those old-timey, like the suave, the cigar smoking gentleman.
I'm Billy D. Williams.
Yeah, like Billy D. Williams. And she walks up and she's like, "Did you have a nice flight?"
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
I love it.
And I was like,
I'm touched by that because as a person with a disability and the conversation about being someone who was a wheelchair user just temporarily for that moment, it makes me really think of how, Benae, you had the capacity to really see her for who she was. And I think that's just a part of your empathetic spirit, which we talked about earlier. But that's beautiful because I know some other people would be very shallow and limited and say, why is this woman coming up here in a wheelchair? And not really understanding the dynamics of our bodies.
Right. Like I said, on that picture, I could tell there was something with her mobility. No, I didn't know she would come in a wheelchair, but I didn't care either. We both deal with our own, I have MS and she has CIDP. I've never progressed to the point of a wheelchair, but I do understand that, and that's part of when I was blogging, discussing different things like that. How do you treat a partner that, you start out young and you were vibrant, but one of you progresses to a state where you're the caregiver. We don't think about those things when we enter into relationships, but it definitely should be at the back of your mind. So back to Annise, I knew that there might have been some issue with walking, didn't know the extent of it. I'd made my mind up. It doesn't matter. I want to know her. And we'd spent 2 years talking on the phone before we'd ever met. And even, I guess, a year before that. On the computer, conversating back and forth. So we're building a relationship. You don't just build a relationship with someone and they walk up and they have a zit on their nose and you're like, can't do it. Because that's what that equates to me.
Right.
She came.
Right.
She was in a wheelchair. I was happy to see her.
I think it's important for us to just kind of stop and put an underline under all that, because as we are talking about Zami Nobla, the organization for Black lesbians 40 and over, we're also talking about how we are redefining the way in which we think about age and thinking about active aging and the ways in which it's a gift every day you have to get another day. And so 50 and 60 and 70, these aren't things where we say, oh my God, I'm getting old. These are things where we say, yes, another day, and it's beautiful. Yeah. Yes. And we realize that what comes with that for some of us are some of the health challenges because we've been in these bodies over the decades. And as partners, to have conversation with each other and to talk about the ways in which bodies need care and to share in each other's well-being.
Yes.
Is very important. Oftentimes when we're younger, we just think about the things we see that we are attracted to. And I think, like you said, Benae, we don't really think about what happens when the body falters.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So how have you all, both having some health issues, how have you all had those conversations about the body and health and how you assist each other with these bodies of ours?
I'll take the first part of this one, Angela. When Benae and I made the decision to get married in October of 2014, her neurologist had just given us probably the most devastating news that we could have ever gotten. And it was that the MS had progressed to the point that she was going to be in a wheelchair. She was going to need, and within the next 3 to 4 months, total assistance. Mm-hmm. That she wasn't going. They were even worried that she was going to be able to feed herself. Mm-hmm. And we're engaged, and so Benae asked me. She said, "If you want to leave, now is the time to go." And I said, "I'm not leaving." And she said, "Well, how are you going to take care of me when you have an illness almost as bad as mine?" And I said, "I'll do what I've always done all my life. I will figure it out." I said, "But I'm not leaving." And even when we did our vows, I think the part of in sickness and in health, mm-hmm. That just really struck me when we did our vows, because we were living it. We were living in sickness and in health. Mm-hmm. And I made an active decision to stay with this woman until death does us part. And like I told her today, I was like, and if you decide to die, please know that I'm going to be over there. I'm going to kick the casket. I'm going to be like, "Benae, get up. You know your butt ain't dead. You just don't want to drive me. Get up."
What a candid and vulnerable conversation with Annise and Benae. I know you're going to want to find out the end of the story, so be sure to check our next episode where we continue a conversation with them. If you're enjoying the podcast, let us know. Feel free to leave feedback and comments, as well as contact us directly. Our email address is podcast@zaminobla.org. As always, thanks for listening. Have a sweet one.